Speaking of other people you might want to do a high school project on.
Nice segue, Duncan.
Thank you. Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas.
What a
Oh
hot
man,
mess.
he has been
What a
in.
hot mess.
So he was taking money for the last decade plus from this billionaire, Republican billionaire, who's a big donor named Crow, and they were taking vacations, and then it turned out Crow bought Thomas's mother's house, and so Clarence Thomas's mother is living in this guy's house that he owns now, and he's made improvements on and all this stuff. Then it turns out that Thomas was not just hanging out with this guy on vacation, but hanging out with conservative lawyers who actually try cases in the Supreme Court, and a firm that actually that's what their business is they try conservative cases in Supreme Court. And so he's hanging out with these guys in private, which is ex parte communication with a judge, which is not legal in most places. But now there's one more thing to add to that pile of dirt that he's been doing. And we're going to go with Anna Kasparian here and the Young Turks. She's going to clue us in.
The Clarence Thomas corruption scandal is the story that just never ends. It's the gift that keeps on giving. It turns out that Justice Thomas reversed one of his positions on one of the country's most significant regulatory decisions after his wife, Ginny, allegedly accepted secret payments from conservative donors, and while he himself was receiving extravagant gifts and luxury vacations from billionaire Harlan Crow. Now, to understand how corruption is at play here, we need context on this legal doctrine in question, which is known as the Chevron doctrine. According to the lever, the so-called Chevron deference doctrine stipulates that the executive branch, not the federal courts, has the power to interpret laws passed by Congress in certain circumstances. Conservatives for years have fought to overturn the doctrine, a move that would empower legal challenges to federal agency regulations on everything from climate policy to workplace safety to overtime pay. So it was the
So I want to go through that real quick because this is pretty important. If you're So now we can get to some financial news here on this, because the Chevron doctrine, if you're a business owner, this is important, and it's one of those things where, as a business owner, you can sit there and go, well, I don't really like it because I have to go through all these regulations, right? Are you okay there? That's some feedback there. Anyway, so the Chevron doctrine works like this because it had to do something with the Chevron Corporation. But it says basically the federal agencies can adjudicate specifics on certain regulatory policy. Because a lot of times Congress, when they pass them, it's vague, right?
Right.
So I'll give you a great example. So the EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency, was founded by Richard Nixon, oddly enough. But the reason they did it was because the Cuyahoga River in Cleveland, Ohio, had literally caught fire several times because of all the this is back in the 70s, because of all the pollutants. So basically the EPA's doctrine was, well, to clean up the rivers and make it safe and all that stuff. Well, to do that, they had to regulate, well, you can't dump these types of pollutants in the river or do these types of things anymore. You have to go through these procedures to get rid of them. Well, then you have to get to the court and go, well, wait a minute, though. Congress didn't say that they could tell us to do all this. It just said they had to clean up the river. But what they found later on under the Chevron doctrine was, well, yeah, but we're going to give the EPA deference and say, look, they get to determine how exactly they're going to do that. And so they can specify regulations. Like, no, you can't just dump gasoline in the river. You have to put it in barrels and you have to take it to a specific site or whatever, right? So that's just an example of the Chevron doctrine. Now, if you're a business, that costs you a lot of money. It's cheaper for me to just dump my pollutants in the Cuyahoga River and go, whoops, it caught fire. Oh, well. Not my problem. I'm upstream.
Oh, darn.
Right. but where it's, you know, harming people in the city and it's deadly. It's like, yeah. So now the EPA comes in and says, hey, Duncan, you can't just dump that anymore. You got to put it in sealable barrels, and you have to have it shipped and transported safely to a specific site to decompose or whatever. And that has to be overseen by these rules and regulations so it doesn't get into topsoil and other. I mean, now all of a sudden I'm spending all this money to get rid of this shit. As where before I could just like, let's just pour it in the river. So you can see where businesses are sitting there going, well, yeah, we'd like to get rid of the Chevron doctrine, especially big corporations, because that'll save us a ton of money. We won't have to comply with all this shit all the time. So like like another big one, OSHA is the safety organization for worker safety. You know, okay, well, that means I've got to provide safety harnesses and back braces, and, you know, I have to allow things like bathroom breaks and, you know,
oh man,
shit like that. Yeah, and I've got to, you know, and then you've got other regulations. Well, you have to give, you know, worker a 10-minute break every 2 hours, and you got to give them a lunch if they work an 8-hour shift for at least a half hour. Right? It's like, I would like to not have to follow those regulations. Right? I would like not to have to not pay overtime.
Right.
So that's what they're talking about here. So we're going to watch a little bit more of this, but essentially what happened is he took money, his wife took money, and then he flipped his position right after his wife took money. And that's what this whole scandal is really about.
Result of the 1984 Supreme Court case, Chevron USA v. Natural Resources Defense Council, which was brought by environmental advocates to challenge Reagan's weakening of air pollution regulations. The Supreme Court deferred to the EPA and its interpretation of the Clean Air Act, which at the time was seen as a win for the polluters. But it was also a win for the administrative state or federal government agencies, which is why conservatives hated it. Now, Thomas wrote a landmark Supreme Court opinion upholding the doctrine in 2005, but began questioning it a decade later before eventually renouncing his past opinion in 2020 and claiming that the doctrine itself might be unconstitutional. Now Thomas could help overturn the doctrine in a new case the High Court just agreed to hear next term. And what do you know? Groups within the conservative legal movement, which includes right-wing donors Leonard Leo and Harlan Crow, have orchestrated an effort in recent years to overturn the decision. What a shocker. They hate that the doctrine empowers federal agencies like the EPA or even the Education Department to interpret and implement statutes. Maybe Claire.
So that's the big kicker, right? That's happening with that scandal now is the guy who's been giving Thomas this money for years for vacations and his mom's house and giving his wife, you know, kickbacks and all this stuff is one of the guys bringing the case to overturn the Chevron doctrine. And now we're supposed to trust that Clarence Thomas is not going to give a biased opinion. He should recuse himself now, but he's not gonna. So
yeah, it's crazy.
I know, it's fucking insane, but the scandals keep getting worse and worse with him, man.
Man, he just needs to step down. I mean, like, he's such an embarrassment to himself.
Well, the whole court.
How could he literally sit there and keep adjudicating things knowing everyone's looking at him like he's a total fraud?
Oh, I mean, I've seen him. I saw him speak live once, and he's just out there as a person. And honestly, him, you know, Alito. I'm confident Alito was the guy that leaked the Dobbs decision that overturned Roe v. Wade. But they dropped that whole case. Chief Justice Roberts isn't even looking for who leaked it, probably because he knows.
Right.
You know, I mean, so the whole court now is just tainted. You know, and then you look at, like, you know, most Americans don't trust the court anymore. Kind of hard to blame them. But it's like these things.
Man.
These things affect us individually, but it affects business. It affects your daily lives. I mean,
I bet Ruth Bader Ginsburg is turning over in her grave, like going.
part of this is her fault. Part of this is her fault. She should have retired sooner. I mean, that, they tried to get her to retire several times and she wouldn't do it. And it's like, okay, and now you died under Trump, and now we got Amy Coney Barrett. Basically we got one of the Stepford wives. A woman who does not believe in women's rights. So
yeah. That's a tough pill to swallow, man.
Well, it's like RBG. You should have retired. You should have retired under Obama. He asked you many times, because then he could have picked somebody. But then even he had the problem with Merrick Garland. So that was all a nightmare. Anyway, so that was the news for today. Just lots and lots of concern.